Maxwell, and I'd like to thank you all for being here. This is the Conspiracy Con 2005, the main speaker's room, and the speaker next is a dear friend of mine, a man who has continued the kind of research that I've been doing for many years. He's one of the few speakers that speaks on the subject that we do that has actually a really deep spiritual understanding of the subject. Many people talk about it academically, but few really understand the dark, mystical, secret establishment behind the subject of symbols and emblems and words and terms. Michael Tsarion has distinguished himself in my eyes as being a man of true spiritual understanding, and this is what makes his work so important in my view. It's both an honor and a pleasure to present my dear friend and colleague, Mr. Michael Tsarion.
Thank you, Jordan. See you later. Thank you, Jordan. That's fine praise coming from the man who alone deserves the title of the world's most controversial speaker. It's good to be back with you all again for another year, remarkably, of Conspiracy Con. And I'd like to thank you all for being here for the conference and to be with me now. I'd also like to especially thank Brian Hall for, again, working his ass off to pull this event together. It's a remarkable event. It's about truth. And I think that I personally want to thank him. And I think we should all thank him with some applause for that. And I know that by all of you coming here, also, by attending here, it's a sign. It's a sign of your own desire, your passionate desire for truth, for the real meaning. You're supporting us, the researchers and the disseminators of truth, not conspiracy theories, but the disseminators of truth, the research community, those who've looked into the matters that lie behind the veil of appearance. But your support of that shows your commitment, your ultimate commitment to that journey, because you're distinguishing yourself from that mass of smiling depressives out there who are happy to learn more and more about less and less until they end up knowing a lot about nothing. That's what's happening by way of the media. You're part of the people who want to expose this faux democracy of this two-party system, because that's coming down on us now. We have also the rise of fundamental evangelist Christian paradigms again, because that's a form of mind control that's worked for 2,000 years, and it's back. So why reinvent the wheel, right? That's worked for thousands of years. Well, you wheel it out again. And we have to offset that. They have their own particular brand of sick theology that's helped drug, you see, drug the mass, drug the human child. And now, because of the age that we're in, and I'll be sharing more about that later, the astrological time that we're in, because we're in an age of awakening, because the child of humanity is ready to wake, he's straining at his chains, they're ready there with the injection for yet a larger dose of mind control, a larger dose of toxic, you see, mind control drugs, so to keep you down. So you're straining at your chains, and they're ready to administer yet more of their poison. The patient, as he struggles to release himself, the more you struggle to release yourself, the more you're in danger, you see, of a greater barrage of toxicity. Now, as Jordan has said many times, we're not going to understand the world we're living in unless we do understand the past. And anyone who's read my book on Atlantis, almost on the first page there, I even echo that and repeat that and say that, in fact, we better realize that even things that we have taken as being mythologies, things that we consider to be myths, they're about to happen. Things that we take for mythologies St. George and his dragon, right? The fall of Lucifer. Things we think are of the past, they're far from of the past. They might even be things of the future. I know that sounds like a paradox, but think about it. Now, the title of tonight's talk is The Origins of Evil. And if that sounds heavy, it is. I've got some fascinating things to share, and around about the middle of the presentation also, I'll be sharing something of the greatest importance with you concerning the origins of evil and concerning the climate that we find ourselves in politically. During the talk, you're going to discover, when you walk out that door, you will be in no doubt about it. If your ears are open, you're paying attention. By the time you walk out that door, you will know today why evil is in the world. I have been questioning that question since as far back as I can remember. It's what got me into all of this. The question of evil should be on the minds of every single human being in the world. It's not on the minds of everybody in the world, but it damn well should be. And if we don't resolve that and find out why we are so inhuman, where this injustice, cruelty, sadism comes from, we are actually bequeathing that question to our children. And everything else rests upon the foundation of that. Our empowerment lies on that question. And I have dedicated my whole life to that research with the help of mentors like Jordan. We've been asking the same questions, we've been asking the right questions. Because within the understanding of that is the secret to bring this Goliath down. And it won't be the first time that a small band of outlaws has brought down an empire, an evil empire. And it won't be the first time that a giant has been destroyed by a boy with a simple weapon. That boy is America. That boy is the people sitting right here. The intelligence community are you. When you know what the truth is and how to use it. But this story of the origins of evil starts in the past. So let's start at the beginning. Robert, if you want to, we can begin. Now, if you look up the term conspiracy theory, it actually is a legitimate sociological term, by the way. And you can go to a sociological dictionary, a thing called a sociological dictionary, like the Collins Sociological Dictionary, and look up the term conspiracy theory. And it's perfectly understood to sociologists what that means. There's nothing negative or reprehensible about it. And in the caption, it usually says that a conspiracy theory is only something reprehensible if two things happen. One is if it is delivered in an outlandish, irrational manner, and B, if it is delivered without any decent proof or evidence. Now, as all of you have seen by being here just in the last couple of days, have you not heard eloquence from this podium? You've heard incredible eloquence. And you'll hear that from me. And you have also heard a lot of them back it up with, resources. And my work fits into that category too. I will present it in an eloquent way, and you will be given the proof. It's on the website, it's in my book, and there are sources. But as a matter of fact, you actually don't even have to be, you or your neighbors, into conspiracy theories at all. All you have to do to be here tonight or be into the subject matter is want to make sense of the world that you're living in. Now, you want to have to make sense of it rationally and passionately, I'm saying, not just because, your life sucks and you want some answers. No, I mean with the whole of your being. You want answers to this mystery that we call life, that we are participating in extraordinary beings living a very ordinary, thinking we're living an ordinary life. Now, if you want answers to the world out there, you probably discovered by now that the corporate media ain't helping. Now, they're not only not going to help, they're going to make it worse. So that's why you have to pick up the slack on your own time, obviously, and come here. Now, Jordan asked an important question at last year's Conspiracy Con. He's asked it since 1992, and probably in his own life, God knows how far back, he's been asking the same question. A very similar question to what I've been asking after years of researching this particular subject of secret societies, fraternities, whatnot. And that is, look, and I mean, the symbolism shows you already that something's up. If there are lower rungs, if there's lower tiers of the great power pyramid, then who is at the top of the power pyramid? You can't study this subject very long before you'll actually start asking that question. It's a good question. It needs to be answered. Who is at the top? Who is this? Jordan says it definitely could not be a human intelligence, and I absolutely concur with that point. That it's not human because it's too smart. It's too intelligent. If you don't believe it, they're happy to tell you that themselves. One of the most powerful secret societies in the world, not the only one, but one of the most powerful one, was called the Bavarian Illuminati. Please excuse me if you're familiar with some of this material, but I'm assuming that people here tonight are for the first time. Welcome. You came here for truth, you're going to get it. Well, one of the most powerful secret societies in the world was called the Bavarian Illuminati. It was founded by a German called Adam Weishaupt, but the mantle later passed to the famous Italian revolutionary Giuseppe Mazzini. Let's read his own words about his order, these secret societies. He says, "We form an association of brothers in all points of the globe, yet there is one unseen that can hardly be felt. Yet it weighs on us. Whence comes it? Where is it? No one knows, or at least no one tells. This association is secret even to us, the veterans of the secret societies." The head of the Illuminati is telling you there's something above us. 1700s. Well, let's come up a little bit more to date. American history, Walter Rathenau, German General Electric, a man who had a lot of say in American politics. 300 men, he says, all of whom know one another, direct the economic destiny of Europe and choose their successors from among themselves. Joseph Kennedy, and he should know, said that 50 men have run America, and that's a high figure. Benjamin Disraeli, the first Jewish Prime Minister of England, who spent his life uncovering the network of subversive organizations, said the world is run by very different personages from what is imagined by those who are not behind the scenes. And your own Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter, he said that the real rulers in Washington are invisible and exercise power from behind the scenes. Senator Inouye says that there exists a shadowy government with its own air force, its own navy, its own fundraising mechanism, and the ability to pursue its own ideals of the national interest, free from all checks and balances, and free from the law itself. Hell, they created the law. You think they're bound by it? Think again. You're bound by it. They'll kick your door in. But you can't even stop them from the atrocities they're perpetrating on the world. Not yet, anyway. And as a general rule of thumb, to those who have studied this and are also beginning their study in this, let's just realize when it comes to these power hierarchies at the top of the pyramid that I'm talking about, as a general rule of thumb, it's not 100% true, but it's about 90% true. If you happen to see the rulers, the controllers, the kings, the princes, the dukes in the media, that means in magazines and newspapers and in encyclopedias and so forth, and history books and on TV, chances are they are not the architects of the programs and the policies that they are instigating. They are just what I refer to as the people's champions. They are just what I refer to in the book as overworld figures. With very few exceptions, they are not the architects of doom. I have a DVD coming out next year called Evil's Willing Servants, which will tell you who are the architects. That's a sort of a missing piece. But just for now, know that if you see them on, the fact that you just see them on television, or the fact that you see them in the common media, they're lower henchmen. Never forget that. It'll empower you to know that, because they are not the henchmen. They're power, drugged, sick, perverted, toxic individuals who serve powers behind the scenes. There's no reason in the world to fear them. The symbolism confirms what I'm saying. Symbolism, the key is symbolism, symbol literacy. They may appear on paper, of course, as, at each other's throats, different parties, different networks, all appearing to have this faux democracy, this faux conflict. But as the symbolism clearly shows you, they all sit at Cecil Rhodes' round table. They all are comfortable, the criminals of the world, pretending through their faux conflict that the ship of state is also difficult to run, and the human race is just so hard to rein in and keep them all under order. We have to prevent war and bring peace. It's so damn difficult. Look at how difficult our job is. But whose table are they sitting around? What are the symbols telling you at the G7 summit? On paper, again, it appears to be a two-party system. Is it? They're happy to tell you actually it's not. They're not going to tell you that verbally, but they're certainly going to tell you in other ways by the symbolism that they use, which I hope that most people in this room are able to decode. But think of the mass of humanity who are not. Ancient symbols being used in modern context, all over the media, all over the world. Languages, words, symbols, that we need to be able to understand what they mean. Doesn't mean the symbol inherently is negative, but it ties in with the fact that they have obediences and allegiances. Not only are these individuals using ancient sacred symbols, but they are a one-party system. Whatever way the coin falls, they win. But more than just using, sacred power symbols and whatnot, these individuals have hidden allegiances that you and I are not meant to know about. So what allegiances? Well, if I'm making a promise to you, but I've got my fingers crossed behind my back, how good is that promise? Well, these characters have very much got their fingers crossed behind their back. They have allegiances, all right, that come before their allegiance to humanity and to the world and to the professed stuff that they're talking about. Here's a perfect example. In Washington, D.C., the statue of George Washington. The whole story is shown to you here. Let's read it. George Washington, it says under the plinth, underneath the bust, Freemason and first president. Let's read it again. Freemason and first president. Now, I'm not even American. I'm actually from Belfast, but I take offense to that statement. Should it not be first president and Freemason? It should be, but they're telling you how the pecking order works. What comes first? And underneath you have the Masonic G. So these behind-the-scenes allegiances come before, and you need to know about it. That's why you never get justice in the courts. That's why you never see any of these people are brought to justice, because of their allegiances that you need to know about that come long before their allegiances to you. Now, in the inception, let's not forget that your greatest enemy of this country wasn't the French, wasn't the Russians, wasn't the outer Mongolians, wasn't the Iraqis, it wasn't the Afghanis, wasn't the Arabs. Oh, guess what? Look it up in a history book. You tell me, who is your first enemy? England, Britain. Now, the British worlds were not worried that force of arms had not secured America for them, right? Because basically they got their ass whipped 200 years ago. Don't let's get started with wondering what happened to America in the meantime to become so complacent. Let's leave that one aside. But armed force, they realized, was only one of many insidious strategies that the royals and their henchmen have used to undermine any rival. The Fabians were sent in as agents in the following years to do their work. Okay, they got plenty of other strategies. So President McKinley, Henry Ford, Howard Hughes, Charles Lindbergh Sr., Senator Joe McCarthy, and anyone else who knew what was happening were either politically or even physically assassinated. Now, who are these Fabians? They're a wing of the secret societies, and they believe in what's called the war of attrition. You should write that down. The war of attrition is very important. The Fabian Society, founded in 1883, played a catalytic role preaching the inevitability of gradualness in the movement towards a socialist society. Socialist is a secret society term, by the way, not a political term. We'll come to that later. Taking their name from the Roman warrior Fabius, who learned to wait patiently before striking a fatal blow against Hannibal. Hannibal is charging over mountains. Hannibal is plowing through jungles. He's hauling elephants across Asia Minor. He's busy crossing lakes. Well, Fabius is sitting whittling on a piece of wood, waiting patiently. Right? The spider in the web. Originally, before and during the American War of Independence, relations were good, very good, with many other powerful nations, like Russia, like France and Germany. People looked to America with respect and admiration. But the Vatican and the British had a great deal to lose if the world's other nations and governments began to base their political systems, you see, on the original American model, which was scintillating. The whole eyes of the world was watching. The Tsar was sending you ships in the War of Independence. Relations were good. Instead of a Cold War, which you had to endure, your forefathers had to endure lasting generations, what would have happened if the admiring Tsar of Russia had modeled his rule, right? He was getting ready to do it, by the way, before the Bolsheviks moved in. But what would have happened if he had totally based his rule on the American system? And what would have happened, may I ask, to Vatican-controlled South America had North America remained sovereign and solvent up here, right? All that mind control down there under the name of religion. What do you think would have happened down there to that country had America been a shining example? You think that the British and that the Vatican could, tolerate that? The American Democratic Party originally was called the Democratic Society. It's actually an offshoot of the Jacobin Club, or the Jacobin Society, which is nothing more than the Illuminati that we've been talking about. The Illuminati's main tentacle operating in the political domain is known in England as the Fabian Society. Their socialist, so-called progressive, but it's really a pseudo-progressive ideology, is disseminated by the Democratic parties and their other left-wing interests. The main idea was that the Democratic Party would be so habitually dysfunctional, falling over themselves like the Keystone Cops, that it would not affect the changes that it espoused, the wonderful changes. In England, they had to have a socialist so-called party. You know why? Because soldiers were coming back from hells that you can't even imagine, coming back to empty towns where their whole bloodline had been wiped out. Revolution was rampant. They couldn't be, and so the government realized we better do something to appease this because they're ready to, we're still living in our mansions, remember? Ever been to England? Think if you're a soldier who's watched your comrades die on the fields of Flanders, in the fields of France, coming home and still watching these regents, you know, in luxury there. What were you going to do? Think of England in those days, what was going to happen. So they appeased the situation by giving you some welfare, giving you some free housing, a car that's practically useless, and a few other, you know, little benefits to appease the foment that was coming. But this party would become so ineffectual and counterproductive that even the most reprehensible forms of conservatism would in fact gain support. The neoconservatism of the present-day Bush dynasty couldn't have existed without this intentional capitulation. This was recently made evident in the last election. It was part of the meta plan that Kerry would be, you know, quote-unquote wishy-washy and a flip-flopper. Now, the man, again, an overworld figure, don't get me wrong, this man is not the creator of the Fabian Society, but he's technically its leader. From the London School of Economics, leader of the Fabian Society, Sidney West. Let's listen to the man himself. He says to play those millions of minds, to watch them, and there's the word, the key word, slowly, remember, Fabian? To watch them slowly respond to an unseen stimulus, to guide their aspirations without their knowledge. All this, whether in high capacities or in humble, is a big and endless game of chess of ever extraordinary excitement. They get a kick out of it. That's the way a doctor in a laboratory talks about the rats when he walks in the morning. The Fabian Society infiltrated a group known as Theosophy, a very sacred order created by one of the most powerful female personages the world has ever played host to, Madame Blavatsky. Researchers who have not done their homework blame her for many of the machinations of the Fabian Society. That is erroneous and is karmically reprehensible to blame beings of the light when you haven't bothered doing your homework. This woman went blue in the face, warning that her society was being taken over, warning against combining spirituality and politics. She would have turned over in her grave to what happened next. But you see, she had already created a perfect edifice where the princes and the dukes and the intelligentsia of the world were already members. So the insidious force that wanted to move in, why reinvent the wheel? Move in and take over. It's ready and waiting. A British intelligence operation, says James Wardner in his fine book Unholy Alliance. He says, swept Madame Blavatsky aside and she was replaced by the British Fabian Society co-founder Annie Besant. Foster Bailey, a 33rd degree Mason, was a leader of that society. His wife, Alice A. Bailey, founded what's known as the Lucifer Trust. Alice Bailey was in the broad circles of society around Queen Victoria, and she always sought the wealthy and titled converts. In her own words, listen to this. She says, behind the division of humanity stand those enlightened ones. All right? So now she's talking about enlightened ones, whose right and privilege it is to watch over human evolution and guide the destinies of men. This they do through the implanting of ideas in the minds of the world thinkers, so that these ideas in due time receive recognition and eventually become the controlling factors in human life. They train the members of the new group of world servers in the task of changing these ideas into ideals. These in turn become the desired objectives of the thinkers and are then taught to the powerful middle class and worked up into world forms of governments or religion, thus forming the basis, and she wrote this at the turn of the century, of the new world order. What's basically this caption telling us? That there's some on high force, the enlightened ones. Remember again the reference? And they are affecting by means unknown to us those policies that, as I'm saying, the characters, the people's champions put into work. Now, as we know, they moved in and took over the reins of the American government through the years, and of course you've listened to many other speakers talk about this. But we want to look for a moment at these American contacts and at the hidden enemies that operate here. Because your dollar bill, as I hope you know by now, and also your cities, and many, many of the other symbols of state and government bear these secret society emblems, coming out of Egypt, but also coming out of the secret society world. On your dollar bill, you have the Illuminati symbol of the pyramid. The Illuminati was founded, as I said a little earlier, by Adam Weishaupt. But when he passed on, the mantle moved to Giuseppe Mazzini, and finally moved to the man on the right, Albert Pike. Every single human being in America should know the name Albert Pike, and very few do. We're talking, you think that the George Bushes and the Clintons and the Roosevelts, and you don't know about Albert Pike? These are the hidden ones that shape the world events, but we almost know nothing about them. Albert Pike is a seminal figure in the creation of the Ku Klux Klan, by the way. George Washington said that I have heard much of the nefarious and dangerous plan of the Illuminati. Now, your neighbor won't believe you. He'll call you a crank. But, the fact is that even George Washington was all knowing about it. It was not my intention, he says, to, doubt that the doctrines of the Illuminati and the principles of Jacobinism had not spread in the United States. On the contrary, no one is more truly satisfied of this fact than I am. Joseph Willard, the president of Harvard University, spoken at the time of his retirement, he says there is sufficient evidence that a number of societies of the Illuminati have established in this land. They are doubtless striving to secretly undermine all our ancient institutions, civil and sacred. We live in an alarming period. The enemies of all order are seeking our ruin. Should infidelity generally prevail, our independence would fall, of course. Our republican government would be annihilated. Now, just like I was explaining about the Theosophy, the mystical organization that was infiltrated by this Lucifer trust, so Freemasonry, which once was a great archive of knowledge, a mystical doctrine, coming out of the ancient world, preserving many metaphysical secrets about the human body and about our relationship with the Creator, that was also infiltrated. Well, why not? If I was them, I'd probably want to do it. There it is, ready and waiting. All set up. So this group of the Illuminati were able to infiltrate that as well. We'll read that in a minute. But the thing is that it alarmed not only George Washington, but the head of World Freemasonry, Grand Orient Freemasonry at the time, was the Duke of Brunswick in the 1700s. And he actually stood up publicly and asked for the worldwide disbandment of Freemasonry because he understood that it was being infiltrated in this way. We're going to read a caption together from the Duke of Brunswick. And I want you to pay particular attention not only to what he's saying, but the way that he is saying it. Because that is an incredible modern appeal. He says, I have been convinced that we, as an order, have come under the power of some very evil occult order, profoundly versed in science, both occult and otherwise, though not infallible, their methods being black magic. That is to say, electromagnetic power, hypnotism, and powerful suggestion. We are convinced that the order is being controlled by some sun order, after the nature of the Illuminati, if not by that order itself. John Robinson, a Scottish man who wrote the first book exposing them, its date is 1798, so just don't think this is a modern thing of the 20th century. John Robinson was approached by, very much in the same way as Anthony Sutton in this country was approached. John Robinson was approached by members of the Illuminati that they wanted intelligentsia. He was a university teacher, you see. He kind of looked into it, and as soon as he found out what was going on, he not only didn't join, he exposed it in an incredible book called Proofs of a Conspiracy. And he quotes Adam Weishaupt, who said that the great strength of our order lies in its concealment. Let it never appear in any place in its own name, but always covered by another name and another occupation. None is fitter than the 3 lower degrees of Freemasonry. The public is accustomed to it, expects little from it, and therefore takes little notice of it. He goes on to say in another place, these good folks swell our numbers and fill our money box. Set yourselves to work. These gentlemen must be made to nibble at the bait. But this sort of people must always be made to believe that the grade they have reached is the last. Well, don't you have fraternities and grades from school upwards where the same policy goes? I don't know if you know how much women played a role in the exposures to secret societies. You need to know about Madame Blavatsky, you need to know about Nesta Webster, and you need to know about Edith Starr Mill or Lady Queensborough. In her book, she says, at the turn of the century, she says, we must allow, quoting from Weishaupt, we must allow all the federations to continue just as they are, with their systems, their central authorities, and their diverse modes of correspondence between high grades of the same right, organized as they are at present, but we must create a super right, which will remain unknown, to which we will call those Masons of high degree, whom we shall select. Through this supreme right, we will govern all Freemasonry, which will become the one international center, the more powerful because its direction will be unknown. So, yes, full circle. All of these individuals, and in my other work, it's just voluminous how much information we've got on this, that they are talking about a hierarchy. The symbols tell you alone, there it is, the two-dimensional, removed 14th level, with the eye, which I believe is the eye of Aton, the solar cult I, officiating over the lower ranks. So just, no doubt about it, should there be. My work has been to expose exactly who those controllers are. And that journey took me into some mighty interesting avenues, I can tell you. To find out that, in fact, they are not necessarily human, but they are coterie descended from, bloodline descended from, alien visitors from other planets. What? That's right. Alien visitors from other planets who visited our planet approximately between 30 and 50,000 years ago. And their interference in our destiny and the manipulation of history, we all need to really know about. We really have to understand this if we're going to make sense of our world. These individuals influenced our culture, our science. For instance, as Lawrence Gardner says, it took man over 1 million years to progress from using stones as he found them to the realization that they could be chipped and flaked to better purpose. It then took another 500,000 years before Neanderthal man mastered the concept of stone tools, and a further 50,000 years before crops were cultivated and metallurgy was discovered. Hence, he says, by all scales of evolutionary reckoning, we should still be as far removed from any basic understanding of mathematics, engineering, or science, but here we are, a mere 7,000 years later, landing probes on Mars. And he asked the all-important question, so how did we inherit this wisdom, and from whom? And then, just in case, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but just in case anybody's just straight in off the street and thinks that no alien visitors could ever visit this planet, they better read what Dr. Harrison H. Brown says from CIT. He estimates that virtually every star in our galaxy has a planetary system, in each of which 2 or 4 planets might have an Earth-like environment and chemistry that encourages our kind of life to exist. He gives the enormous figure of 100 billion stars with planets in the Milky Way galaxy alone, and get this, there are 450 billion of those galaxies. If that makes you feel small, good. But we don't have to look to scientists for that. My work is entirely based on the mythologies, of the ancient world, the legends. Oh yeah, they used to say it as old wives' tales, so nobody paid it any mind. But we don't have to look to science to wait to tell us what our forefathers were telling us all along. The scriptures, the apocryphal works, the Gnostic texts. Isaiah 13, they come from a far country, from the end of heaven, to destroy the whole land. Isaiah 6, who are these that fly in a cloud as the doves to their windows? Well, who indeed? They're known by many names all over the culture. Jack Barringer, a researcher in this very subject, who wrote a book called Past Shock, he says that there's at least 30,000 texts. And that's only the texts that are left after all the burnings and purgings. There's still in existence at least 30,000 texts talking about this visitation. And every single culture in the world, almost bar none, reveal them. The Nephilim, the Anakim, the giants, the Titans. The Indians know them as the Nagas. The Irish knew them as the Nadreds, which is a word that means serpent. And more recently, they're known as the Brotherhood of the Snake or the Serpent people. And we'll explain that why, because there's been a lot of disinformation about that from certain people within the research community. We'll clear that one up today, too. The word Nephilim, actually, which is the most common name for these individuals. The etymology of Nephilim is uncertain, but the following explanations have been advanced. First, it may derive from nifal, which is a verb, from the verb to be extraordinary, or the extraordinary men. It may derive from the verb en napal, which means the fallen ones from heaven. Supernatural beings, you see, although it could mean morally fallen men. Take your pick. The International Standard Bible Encyclopedia defines it as meaning unnaturally begotten men, bastards. From nepel, abortion or miscarriage. Most modern versions of the Bible have left the word untranslated. The word also may come from nephel, which means bad or strange birth, as I said, or from Nephilim, which means the serpents. Now, these so-called fallen angels were extremely scientifically advanced humanoid beings who came to Earth after being forced to exit their own planet or planets. They had been expunged by opposition forces and pursued across the galaxy into our solar system. And some scientists now are thinking that the sun, in the same way that even Frank Herbert was talking about bending space, and using even the sun as an event horizon. The concept is now coming into science through individuals like Nazim Haramein, that the sun is even a black hole by which you can, fly between the galaxies. It's not my forte, but I just want to put that out there. So they arrived into our space into our solar system. Upon arrival, they set up an unmanned makeshift decoy center on the planet Tiamat, which once existed between Mars and Jupiter, but they actually took refuge on our Earth here, in many of its underground caverns. Tiamat was a vast ocean planet in our solar system, known from antiquity as the second sun. It was 15 times larger than our Earth, and it was an entire ocean planet. An entirely ocean planet. It wasn't a sun, but its atmosphere was so resplendent that the actual sun's rays, when shining on Tiamat, made it appear to people on Earth that it was a sun. And it was known as the second sun from antiquity. If you think that's kind of odd, just remember that Venus is like the second or third brightest orb in the sky and actually casts a shadow on our Earth on a moonless night. And Allen and Dallaire, in their book Cataclysm, these are top scientists from Oxford and Cambridge. I quote them a lot in the Atlantis book, because the science is in, by the way. This is not just some hokomania. The science is in for every single thing that you're hearing today. If we elevate the moon to planetary status, they say, as the Sumerians appear to have done, then we have a total of 10 planets orbiting the sun. Now, if you're into Zachariah Sitchin, this is all old news to you. On this basis, one planet is currently still missing from the earlier Sumerian total. Could there really have been another planet known to the Sumerians, as yet unknown to us or lost since their day? Well, wait a minute, Tiamat ain't there. Well, we do know what lies between Mars and Jupiter is the asteroid belt, right? That's right. Tiamat is not there today because it was destroyed by those pursuers of the Nephilim. This is what distinguishes my findings from Sitchin and from Velikovsky and others who research this field. Wonderful researchers, but I have found out something else, and that is that it was by humanoid. It wasn't some careering comet charging through our solar system. It was actually a humanoid intervention, the destruction of a planet 15 times larger than the Earth, made up entirely of oceans. Your enemy, you must think your enemy's pretty bad if you do that, right? But these guys were so convinced that the Nephilim were on Tiamat, they utterly obliterated, causing the almost unimaginable, magnetic storms and chaos in our universe. That is the event that caused the first flood. Tiamat's waters literally pouring down, and by the way, all the records talk about that. It's not waters coming up from below, it's waters raining down on you from the sky. Well, hell yeah. Do you know, in fact, as Allen and Dallaire have proven, that pre the deluge, pre the flood, we only had one ocean on this planet, and it was called the Miocene Ocean, and the remnants of the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, if you're from Russia or Slovakia or from Estonia and from those Baltic lands, you'll know this, that the Caspian and the Black Sea have an interesting mythology. They're the remnants of the only ocean that we had before the deluge. All that Pacific and Atlantic and Indian Ocean, they're new. They just moved in. They're squatters. In the Babylonian Enuma Elish, we read about it. It says, go and cut off Tiamat's life, and let the winds convey her blood to the secret places. Flowery language, granted. Mythological language, granted. But there it is. Go and cut off Tiamat's life, let the winds convey her blood to the secret places. Now, one of the greatest documents that helps to reveal the whole history of the Nephilim is called the Book of Enoch. It should have been in the Bible, but it didn't get there. And behold, a star fell from heaven, it says, and the children of the earth began to tremble and quake before them and to flee from them. And again I saw how they began to gore each other and to devour each other, and the earth began to cry aloud. Right? Just like Revelation says, a star fell from heaven. Now the Nephilim were not on Tiamat, as I said. They had descended to earth to hide. After the deluge, they emerged and set up their dummy base. Sorry, not their dummy base, but their actual base, known as Atlantis, on the vast continent of Appalachia. Appalachia is now beneath the waters, but it used to be England and Ireland, part of Scandinavia, the Arctic, Greenland and Iceland. You could walk the whole way. Atlantis is not a continent, like it's been told over and over again erroneously. Atlantis was on a continent. Right? You can go to Delhi and see beautiful English buildings, that the British troops and the British government built in all of their empire, but you wouldn't say that Delhi is London. Right? London's in England. So just because you you turn over a stone somewhere, like lots of researchers do, and they think, I found Atlantis. Every 2 years you hear somebody's found Atlantis. Atlantis was an empire. You can have outposts and bastions in all the corners of the world, but don't then run up for your own aggrandizement and say, I found Atlantis. Be specific. From there, they set about making contact with the Earth's indigenous inhabitants. The books of the old world tell us about it. The Bible, Genesis says, the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. Okay, so they even tried to contact, for some reason, best known to themselves, they were interested in the Earth women, only joking. And they tried to get involved with them, as you would. Anyway, the Gnostic texts tell us more about it. They say, now come, let us seize. I like that word, seize. Let us seize her and let us cast our seed on her, so that then she is polluted, she will not be able to ascend to her light. But those whom she will beget will serve us. Gods need servants now? In the Ethiopia Kebra Nagast, this incredible book tells us that the daughters of Cain, with whom the angels had companied, conceived. They actually did conceive. But they were unable to bring forth their children, and they died. And of the children who were in their wombs, some died, and some came forth, having split open the bellies of their mothers, they came forth by their navels. So this was some hideous, like Rosemary Baby Plus. It obviously didn't work very well. Another Gnostic text, please do not ask me to pronounce that. The daughters of darkness became pregnant as a result of the beauty of the forms of the emissary. As a result of the beauty of the forms of the emissary. That's exactly what Celtic mythology says, that the evil ones were incredibly handsome physically. In fact, in Gaelic, the term we still use today for beautiful, usbre, means beautiful. They'll see a beautiful child and they go, oh, he's such a bray. Right? And that was the king of the Nephilim from Irish mythology. It's a weird thing. Now, they say that and the fruits of their bodies fell upon earth and consumed the blossoms of the trees. So then Samyaza, their leader, says to them, we have this quote from the Book of Enoch and so on, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. Now most scholars think that this sin refers to the physical impregnation we've just been talking about. Actually, sadly, unfortunately for us, the human race, it does not in fact mean that. A lot of beings have probably come to this planet, and probably still do. They do their little thing, they look at some rocks, they do their research, and then they're gone. They do not violate what Gene Roddenberry called the prime directive. The group that we are going to examine in a minute did do that. But it wasn't just the physical impregnation of the females that is the sin that is involved. That great sin, ladies and gentlemen, which we have to understand, was something else that happened approximately 30 to 50,000 years ago. And it was the transgenic experimentation, the genetic hybridization of our original forefathers that were on this planet. That means, very simply, the crossing of alien DNA. Humanoid, yes, but alien DNA with the DNA of our forefathers. In Genesis 1 we read, and God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. Let's not get into that whole thing about the hour right now. That's always been a bone of contention. I'd like to explore it, but we haven't got the time. Just let's focus on the fact that it's saying after our likeness. The gods are making man in their likeness. Corinthians backs this up. We read, the first man, Adam, became a living being, the last Adam, a life-giving spirit. 2 atoms? Well, wait a minute. How come we never learned that in Sunday school? What's this 2 atoms bit? The spiritual did not come first, says the passage, but the natural. And after that, the spiritual. The first man was of the dust of the earth, the second man from heaven. So it sounds unspiritual until you decode it. They're literally telling you that the first man, Adam, was of the earth, and the second one is a creation from up there, from the heavens. He's spiritual. That word is so colored that we think it means something holy. It doesn't. It means not of the earth. Another term you might want to use in reference to this is the firstborn. This is a reference to these sons of the serpent, the first, beings that they created. This hybrid race, also known, I believe, as the race of the Elohim. So when you hear about the Jehovahs and the Elohims, that's what you're hearing about. The term that I prefer to use, more modern term in my book, is Homo Atlantis, because this being actually was created on Atlantis. And what a remarkable being indeed. And we're talking to the alien side, it's Mr. Spock, plus thousands of years. Very, very advanced technological beings. And then something else that the alien masters didn't have and probably didn't even understand. The human component, which I believe had the moral sensibility, the violet ray. At least it had the connection to the Earth Mother, the Matrix. A remarkable entity. And we are, in fact, descended from him. George Norrie asked me last night, do you mean that every single is there anybody with a pure, human blood? No, they're not. Every single being today has a various, cocktail of this. We're going to explore that more in a minute. However, the sons of the serpent, the Elohim, you see, had it all turned on. They were just equally intelligent, and I believe they're actually a little bit more, grounded and intelligent than even their masters. So to cut a very long story short, they decided that, wait a minute, this servitude bit, no, we're not into that gig. We want to, blow this status quo. So after an undiscernible time, undisclosed time, they decided to exodus. They decided to leave the continent of Appalachia, to vacate. And they did so, and they set up their own base on another continent on our planet at that time, which was known as Oceania, or better known as Lemuria. And they set up their own thriving culture there. And many of the scholars who look into this say that it's all the high culture, the Mozarts, the Beethovens, the Salvador Dali's, the whatnot. That's where that's coming from. Okay? Lemuria is an interesting name. Etymology tells us an awful lot. It means the land ancestral, land of the ancestors from Mu or Muhadevi, the Hindu mother goddess. This goddess was the personification of Lemuria itself, the motherland of humanity. Shiva, her counterpart, the great father of humanity. An Indian Tamil text, the Silabadarkan, says that describes a lost continent in the Pacific and Indian Ocean. It calls the Kamai Nadu, or the Kamari Kundum, that is, means the dragon land of the immortal serpent. The rebellion and exodus of the sons compelled the Atlanteans to return to their drawing boards. They began a second major hybridization program and created a Mark II being that we can call Adamic. These beings were of both sexes, but in the beginning they could not reproduce. They made excellent servants in the garden. Ancient chronicles, ancient texts, and sources. We know that when the conquistadors got to South America, Zamaraga and these bishops and cardinals were just burning and desecrating the ancient chronicles all over the world, but they especially did it in South America. I want to share with you a caption from a Mexican codices, one of the remaining books, and it's the Popol Vuh. It's one of only two, like the Dresden Codex, the Popol Vuh. I think that's about it, basically, that will survive. I want to read this with you, and again, if this is any example of what these many burned books contained, and I do believe it is, we can understand why they were burned. The Popol Vuh says, and this is the God speaking, "Let us make him who shall nourish and sustain us. What shall we do to be invoked, to be remembered in earth? We have tried with our first creatures, but we could not make them venerate us. So then let us try to make obedient, respectful beings who shall nourish and sustain us." Now the question immediately arises, why would gods need servants to nourish and sustain them? And what's this bit about the first creatures who wouldn't and the second ones who would? If this is an example of what was in those ancient books, we have now a handle on why it was so important for the ruling dynasties of the more later times to get rid of them. Same thing happened in Ireland, desecrations untold. And not only of books. In the Babylonian account, man is to be merely a slave brought into being by Marduk at the plea of the defeated rebel gods, so that those gods themselves need not be subjugated to servile labor. Man would be a puppet, a lowly primitive creature. The Epic of Atrahasis, which dates to about 1630 BC, found in the Assyrian Library of Nineveh, and Sir Zacharias knows all about that book. It says that in a similar vein to the Enuma Elish, one of the main ideals is to show why man was created by the gods. It was so that they themselves need not work on the earth to produce their own food. Now the alien geneticists did not desire a repeat of their first experiment. They realized that the error, the first time, the error had centered on the intelligence of their Mark I experiment. Therefore, in the Mark II experiment, Adamic man's intelligence would be confounded. Adamic man's intelligence would be confounded. Well, we hear about that, but we don't know we're reading it. Because the euphemism that has been used for that state of dumbed downness is the word naked. So just remember, when you read the word naked in the Bible or the other apocryphal works, that Adam and Eve were sent into the garden naked, please understand that it is a euphemism for being in a state of intellectual, psychological ignorance. It doesn't make any sense in the world to think of it as physical nakedness. They were in a dumbed down state. Well, listen, you can sit in a laboratory now, or half an hour, they'll stick a few probes in your brain and you'll be naked, you'll be dumbed down. They can do it in half an hour. Think what you could do if you had the power of the genome and the cell and the mitochondria. No problem. Genesis 3 says, "By the sweat of thy face will be thy bread." This is God, by the way. This is your God talking to his creations. "By the sweat of thy face will be thy bread, until you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for dust thou art, and to dust thou wilt return." They give you the same line when they're putting you in the dirt now. When you go to a funeral, perk up, listen to that, and listen to the condescension that's behind it. My father died, he's not dust. Your parents have died, they're not dust. Who is this that calls our parents and the fallen of our planet the dust? Genesis 11 says, and the Lord said, look, the people are united and they all have but one language. Come on, let us go down and therefore confound their language so that they cannot understand one another's speech. Again, this is an oft-quoted and oft-researched passage. But the language is not verbal. All right? This is the language of the chemical soup. Now, thank God, we've come far. We can look back at this and understand it. This is the symbiotic, spiritual language that's being confounded. Genesis 3:22, and that number 322 is a very important number to secret societies, by the way. In Genesis 3:22, and the Lord God said, behold, the man is become as one of us to know good and evil. Now, lest he put forth his hand to take off the tree of life, we better get down there and do something. This is an implication that the first creatures did have full knowledge of good and evil, but this time that would not be permitted. So they had to do something. That term tree of life, by the way, is a term that relates to the DNA. DNA was known in the ancient times. I know most people don't believe that that's possible, but it was. The only thing was that they did not, portray or think of DNA as this sort of weird Lego set floating in hyperspace that they perpetually show you today on TV. They had a much more organic notion of it. It was a tree of 22 branches and roots, with its roots in the earth and its branches in the heavens. It's the same symbol on the two coiling serpents, because they understood that it had a serpentine look. And this is probably a good juncture as to explain why the term serpent was used. It's not because they look like serpents. They look humanoid. The Semitic word for serpent is nahash. And that word also has a second meaning of discovery, to find out. So evidently this refers to science. Therefore the Nephilim were super scientists. And the term serpent stuck because that's what it means. Because under the microscope they've actually looked at it, and the DNA helix looks like a serpentine shape. Therefore those who were the scientists, as the medical profession and conglomerate still use today, the caduceus of Hermes, right? Those who had the knowledge of that would wear the logo or be called the serpent people. Not because they had scales and looked like serpent people. In Genesis 2 it says, and the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. You see on the God who's doing this, you see what? The twin serpents of the DNA. You always see that if you look at the great mythologies of the world. The Indian shamans, Native American shaman, using the serpents. In that previous picture, you not only saw the twin serpents, but you saw this thing that all the gods of Egypt hold. It's called the Ankh. And everybody's got a theory about the Ankh. It's meant to be breath, it's meant to be life, it's meant to be the union of opposites, and of course that's true. But actually, ancient people like Hebrew and the ancient languages did not use vowels. So we have many words come down to us that use only strong consonants, or what would have passed for consonants. The word Ankh, by the way, if you add in the other sound values, is actually the word Anu, right? NK, not he. So just know from now on that the Ankh, if you see the god holding the Ankh, it literally is the composite word of the word Anunnaki, which is known as the word for the fallen angels, or the gods from on high, Ananaje, the heavenly serpents. So that's what the Ankh really stands for. But we find serpent symbols all over the place. We find them in the modern milieu as well. We find words of power that we don't mean anything in English, but until you discover what is being said. What is the serpent that encoils Euroborically? What is the Pentium, the room of the five, or the serpentium? We have symbolism that has always troubled me. We've got Knights of Templar crosses, Maltese crosses. We've got green dragons crowned, devouring human beings. Where do these symbols come from? Why are they being used? The Italian Prime Minister Berlusconi, here's his house. Instead of having a paddling pool for the kiddies out in the front garden, now he prefers a black serpent eating a human being. I'd love to hear the story that he tells you when you ask him, hey mate, where you got that black serpent in the garden that's eating a fella, He goes, it's a tattoo. But the fact of the matter is, even the positioning of these people's houses or on special vortexes. There's a subject that's very important to understand related to archoastronomy and geomancy about why, like the ancient fathers did this. They put symbols in the earth, did they not? Well, it's happening again. Freemasonry, we looked at the compass and the G earlier on, and of course researchers are always telling you the G represents, oh, it's God, it's Gaia, it's geometry. No, it's not. The lowercase g, when it's done like that, is a little cryptic anagram for the serpent. That's why it's there. Because the Masons, now being infiltrated and so forth, right, are doing the work. That's why George, there's lots of kings called George. The Georgus, St. George and the Dragon, right? George and the Dragon, not James and the Dragon or Johnny and the Dragon. It's George and the Dragon. Because the G is important. Don't believe me? Think I'm making it up? They're happy to tell you. There is the serpent, G, in connection to the gene trust. And they're asking you to be a part of history. Yeah, their history. But we have to get symbolically literate because they're showing you ancient symbols out of the world of religion and theocracy and theology, right? Always when they're dealing with high-end science. We just think it's a cute design and don't think of it anymore. But everywhere you see something spiritual, it's always alongside high technology. Right? Every time you see something about genes, it's some meditation pose or spirituality. Every time you see the DNA, they're talking serpents and trees. Here's the one for the countdown of war, the latest war, when war was declared on Iraq recently. This is the cover of Time magazine. They're calling it a special report. But on the front cover, you don't see troops and, and tanks and whatnot. What do you actually see? Right? Here we have a countdown to war, but we get the main story is solving the mysteries of DNA. We're going to find out what the connection is, but look at the symbolism. Solving the mysteries of DNA, and they're showing you from the book of Genesis. The tree of life, the primal parents, and the DNA serpentine spiral. Did they know something we don't know? Now the Lemurians, or the sons of the serpents, became aware of their creator's second experiments, you see. See, on Lemuria, this other coterie of basically enlightened beings, they're not dumb, They're watching their forefathers on Atlantis, thinking they might get up to this. So the Lemurians actually do become aware of their creator's second experiments. Now they have a dilemma, realizing that the race of Adam, you see, was in fact kindred to themselves. They both possessed the human DNA. It was therefore decided that representatives would be sent to Atlantis to dialogue with the enslaved and dumbed down Adams and Eves. Thus we have the story, corrupted later, of the serpent entering the garden. So the book of Genesis is completely upside down. Completely upside down. And if you study the artwork of the great masters who knew what we're talking about today, you will see in their symbolism of the androgynous serpent and how he's trying to free as opposed to tempt anyone. Now, the story goes, you see, that the sons entered into the gardens and spoke with their genetic cousins. They counseled them to throw off their chains of servitude and accompany them back to Lemuria, where they would be initiated into all that had been hidden from them. It is written that the Adams were resistant to the invitation. Right? The Adams were just not getting it. But fortunately, the responses of the Eves was different. The ancient mythologies talk about that the Eves were mysteriously attracted to these visitors and were heeding them and are basically responsible for this exodus. This is very much important to know because it ties into why women have been marginalized henceforth. In fact, Madame Blavatsky puts it this way. She says the appellation Satan, that means the word Satan in Hebrew, belongs by right to the first and cruelest adversary of all other gods, Jehovah, and not in the serpent which spoke only words of sympathy and wisdom. How right she is. And in the book of Genesis we hear the hatred, you see, towards the female for doing this. This caption that we're going to read now is meant to be to the serpent, but it is not. It is to somebody else. And it says, because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly thou wilt go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. Women committed a certain crime, quote unquote, 13,500 years ago, for which they have never been forgiven. That is why they have not held any office worth anything. Don't be fooled by what you see on today's history books. As Leonard Shlain puts it, when we look back across the historical time of patriarchy, there seems to be some terrible inevitability, a relentless desire to crush the female essence. And he admits it. This is a top scientist from San Francisco, but he admits it. The question of why is one of the most puzzling of our time. So we come full circle. What does this have to do with the origins of evil? In the preface of the Atlantis book, it says, during the next 10 years, the human race is destined to finally discover the true origins and destiny. As part of this discovery, we have to address the overwhelmingly important question of how the phenomena of evil came into the world and into the consciousness of Earth's human inhabitants. What we need to reveal now and understand is that it is this genetic, transgenic experimentation. It is exactly the consequences of this experimentation that caused what we now call the evil to come into existence. It's time for that fact to be known. It's not nature that did it. Nature, which is in perfect balance from the biggest neutron star to the smallest quanta. Why would it put a proclivity so deadly in its highest creation to undermine its own order? To even, embody such a monstrous idea is to be utterly under the worst kind of mind control. Because if nature is dumb and made a mistake and kind of blew it, then aren't we then justified in the slaughter of nature and the degradation of nature and the indigenous people that are also in harmony with nature and the animals which are our brethren and our teachers? Look what happens when you embody such a lie. No, ladies and gentlemen, it is constant tinkering and tampering with the inviolable laws of nature that cause such things like evil to come in the world. It's not some Darwinian blunder. What a notion. How dare we think that when we have a universe in perfect balance all around us? The very word Adam means cut off or divided. Adam comes from Adom, meaning the divided one. Well, yes, if you're divided inside, if you're schizophrenic inside, if you're bipolar, we're not even talking psychologically here, we're talking genetically, right? If you have bipolarity on that depth of your level, then it echoes through your being. If we are psychologically, emotionally, genetically schizoid, aren't we going to create a schizogenic society? So you can wave all the placards you want, and you can try to, mend the problem by running around in the streets and getting into the political pigsty. But haven't we seen that nothing's ever got done that way? Because we're not even focusing on the right place. We are generating it from within. You can't scrub the outside of a suitcase to clean the laundry inside. Well, you can try. It would be a comedy for everybody watching. Comic relief. But I think your laundry is going to remain exactly as dirty as it is. You can't make a dish and, just say, oh, I don't have any salt, but this stuff called sugar looks like the same, it'll do. And hope to, that you can exchange those two ingredients and that the dish is going to come out fine. Just because it looks the same. In fact, Leonard Slane, talking about this, recounts Plato, and we read something absolutely remarkable, which has meaning for everyone here. Zeus gathered the gods in council to express his concern that these unusual creatures would one day challenge their hegemony. He was loath to exterminate them with his thunderbolts, though, because there would be no one to bring the gods offerings. No hot coffee in the morning, no remote control for the TV, it sucks, He solved the problem by putting each creature into a trance and then splitting it down the middle. Upon awakening, each half only dimly remembered what it had been prior to being cleft in two. Zeus explained to the assembled gods and goddesses the cleverness of his scheme. These creatures would no longer pose a threat to the gods because they would dissipate their considerable energy by spending the rest of their days searching for their missing halves. Does that sound familiar? Leonard Slane goes on to say in another book, Eve's descendants have steadily accumulated the power to destroy each other in an unholy Armageddon, and like sleepwalkers are shuffling towards a planetary ecological disaster. How could a slight 5-foot-tall, two-legged animal create such sublimity and then wreak so much havoc in so minuscule an interval in Earth's history? You'll walk out that door and you'll know why. Erich Fromm, the great German sociologist and social critic, says that the detailed description of the life of primitive hunters and food gatherers has shown that man, at least as he fully emerged 50,000 years ago, was most likely not the brutal, destructive, cruel being, and hence not the prototype of man the killer that we find in more developed stages of evolution. So he's dating it. He's saying, say about before 50,000 years ago, there's no evidence to show that man had these capacities for inhumanity that we have now. And we've talked about it, I've talked about it, and even on a much higher level, philosophers and savants have always talked about it. It's a very serious question in life. What is the real difference between man, right, and the primates? Or man and beast? The only trouble is, do you really want to know the answer? It isn't pretty. Man differs from the animal, all right. by the fact that he is a killer. He, the only primate that kills and tortures members of his own species without any reason, either biological or economic, and who feels satisfaction in doing so. I've lived in Ireland, I've seen it. Tolkien was in the trenches, he saw it. It is this biologically non-adaptive, non-phylogenetically programmed malignant aggression that constitutes the real problem and danger to man's existence as a species. The most ample and horrifying documentation for seemingly spontaneous forms of destructiveness are on the record of civilized history. The history of war is a report of ruthless and indiscriminate killing and torture whose victims are men, women, and children. Many of these occurrences give the impression of orgies of destruction, in which neither conventional nor genuinely moral factors have any inhibitory effect. There is hardly a destructive act human imagination could think of that has not been acted out again and again. Schlein says that in regards to aggression, creation is a nightmare spectacle taking place on a planet that has been soaked for hundreds of millions of years in the blood of all its creatures. The soberest conclusion we can make is that the planet is being turned into a vast pit of fertilizer. The major rise in killing prowess occurred primarily in the last 100,000 years, and look at this. The sharpest spike is limited to the last 40,000. I say that the net result is that post-Diluvian humanity, after we've been made schizoid, after we've had this splicing take place, the net result is that the post-Diluvian humanity is left with the consequences of their schizophrenia, with each person condemned like Hamlets to deal with their moral dilemmas as best they can. You're just stuck with it. Yeah, you go and take care of it, whatever. As Nobel laureate Konrad Lorenz said, man is the missing link between apes and human beings. I actually believe that because of this utterly, incredibly devastating effect on our biology, that the Lemurians, trying to offset the worst of that, trying to, after the Adams and Eves went to Lemuria, and the promise was that they try to condition out the alien DNA, or maybe even genetically, again, doubly interfere now, and try to remedy the problem. But I actually believe, just for your interest, because I know many of you are into the mystical tradition, I also believe, and we can talk about this later, that the yogic systems actually probably date from the time of Lemuria. They may have been devised for the express purpose of combating the alien proclivities or for conditioning out the alien DNA. These problematic yogic processes were merely one of the methods chosen to deal with his biological and psychological legacy. Basically, yoga had to do with cleansing and hygiene. It didn't have to do with meeting God and sitting at the right hand of Jesus and all that stuff. It had to do with cleaning your psyche. Many of the practices of yoga, which means to link back or tie together, make greater sense when understood in this context. It's just an interesting thing. However, when the Atlanteans found out that they're perfect slaves, when they wake up and there is no coffee and there is no remote control and there's no slippers under the bed, and then they go out and find out that their perfect slave has been seduced away by their first slave, they ain't happy. So unhappy are they that they actually unleashed a war, a global nuclear war on the Lemurians, on our planet 13,000 years ago. The Lemurians, not being backward, retaliated. And we have, as all the mythologies of the world, I'm sorry, if you're not familiar with mythologies, this is going to come as like a big shock and you're not going to believe it. But do your homework and you'll find out that all the mythologies of the world talk about this, the war of the gods. And when they're talking about the war of the gods, they're also talking about the super weaponry involved. And they're also talking about psychic abilities, psychic violence taking place. This incredible global nuclear war is meant to have irradiated all the moisture in our atmosphere and also caused, magnetic storms in the ionosphere and in the Roche field limit. It had devastating consequences. And I actually believe that the radiation and fallout from that may actually have created some of the idioms that we read when we're talking about the gods. Their gigantic height, the giants, or the pied nature of their skin, or the three eyes, all that famous stuff from mythology. You can take it either way. Either the giants came here and they were giants already, huge. I actually do believe that also. But I think another contributing factor was simply the fallout. So when you're reading these weird, anecdotes and you go, this is nonsense, this is for the kids. Think again. The radiation and fallout can cause those peculiarities that you read about in the descriptions of Osiris, and Set and all the different gods and the way that they appeared. Here's the dig that's happening now in Saudi Arabia, digging up the gods. And nuclear radiation is thought to have dramatically affected the pineal and pituitary glands, the endocrine system, and the DNA. This, together with massive changes in earth magnetism, led to all kinds of biological maladies. Giantism, disfigurement, vampirism, autism, hyperpigmentation, carnivorousness are all thought to have related to this. You look at the cave art you see in the Venus of Willendorf's figures, and even the little people, What's that all about? All over the world, human footprints have been found alongside dinosaur tracks. Some of those footprints are 15 inches long. But these tracks of human beings have been seen, as Michael Cremo and Graham Hancock have exposed, you see, have been found alongside dinosaurs. So have we been sold a lie about the dinosaurs? Are they reptilian creatures, ordinary reptiles that have been, their organs have been affected by the fallout? And then to hide this fact, they're telling us, oh, they were millions of years ago? We know now that they weren't millions of years ago. So then how did they get to that size? Now here's one of the most important statements, because a lot of you have researched this interesting information from other scholars like Zachariah Sitchin and so on. However, has something struck you that's odd? Here we are, I believe it's May 27th, Conspiracy Con, Bay Area, California. How come we're still talking about this? What we're describing happened 13,000 years ago. That's a hell of a long gap. If there's a war of the gods, how come there's no denouement? How come there's no conclusion? How come we're even still talking about this now? Because look, it's obvious, isn't it? If the Atlanteans had won, we'd all be troglodytes, slaves. And if the Lemurians had won, then we'd be living in peace and harmony on a beauteous, planet in harmony. Since neither of those two things are a fact, then there must have been some variable that offset the ending. I don't know why the other scholars have not noticed this. It's always perplexed me as to why that is. There was a variable, all right. That variable, ladies and gentlemen, was the polar shift, the axial shift of our Earth, precipitated by the ferocity of the war that I described. And neither party was ready for it. Neither party knew too much about the Earth. They were recent visitors here. They didn't know too much about the ultraviolet light, the Schumann waves, and even the size of the planet and all of that. They had no idea of understanding how the planet Earth would respond with a violence of its own to their unimaginable violence. They weren't prepared for it. Now, deluge, water, boulders and stuff pouring down from the heavens in the famous 40 days of rain and whatnot is pretty cataclysmic. But the Earth does recover from that after a given period of time. Pole shift is something else again. Pole shift is, the Eiffel Tower sticking head first in Hawaii. Pole shift is boulders the size of mountains flying through the air. Pole shift is the mass extinction of almost all the flora and the fauna on the planet. It's all etched inside your racial memory, by the way. I know that the psychologists have fooled you into thinking that a lot of your psychological fears and phobias are psychological in nature. No, they're not. They're physiological in their nature. They're your memory of these very events that happened in a blink of the eye ago, historically speaking. And that is the reason why none of this is here anymore. Because not one, it's another piece of disinformation, not one continent sank beneath the ocean, but at least 4. Avalon, remember famous Avalon? And Lyonesse. But actually there was massive continents. Appalachia sinks beneath the waves. Tyrrhenia, Oceania, Beringia, Fennoscandia. And the Miocene Ocean, they say, it tipped out of its basin and became the Mediterranean. What the Mediterranean is today is the old Miocene Ocean, and all that got left was the Black and Caspian Sea. You can't imagine the havoc. Allen and Dallaire go into describing it in their books. I have abstractions in my book of their work and talk about it also. The world reels, the world dies. Atlas actually means, Atlas coming from Atlantis, the word actually means the one who could not withstand the skies. Ireland is actually known today to be called the Blessed or Fortunate Isles. Why? Because it was known to the people there, you see, that it had actually survived this cataclysm. That's why it was given that name. The Egyptian papyrus says that south becomes north and the earth turns over. The Bible and the apocryphal works tell us the earth is utterly broken down, moved exceedingly. Moved exceedingly? Isaiah 24 says, Behold, the Lord maketh the earth empty, and maketh it waste, and turneth it upside down, and scattereth abroad the inhabitants thereof. What, this writer's on drugs now? Oh no. 2 Peter 3 says, For this they were willingly ignorant. I love that, willingly ignorant. The world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. The only place that could sustain life after that period was the area of the new equator, where our equator basically is now, in what we call Asia Minor. So the remnants of the Atlanteans set up their bases, set up their new headquarters after a semblance of normality has returned in what we know to be Mesopotamia. That's where the Sumerian, Babylonian cultures of blood, the tyrannies, the first aggressive, empires arose. And aren't all modern civilizations and cultures based on those patterns? Well, guess who was set up there? And it's from that area that they decided, these guys are pretty amazing, they decided that they weren't going to give up. They're raped of all of their technology. I mean, if the continents beneath your feet have gone down, so have all your temple citadels, so has all your crystalline technology and computers, so has a lot of your spacecrafts, and certainly your weaponry. Remember that old Superman? They're telling you the whole story in Superman. Who is the Superman who comes from another planet, who's got this temple precinct full of computers and has remarkable powers and comes from out there? Well, that's all gone. It's like your old frontier western guys, if they take the gun off them, they feel naked. Well, think you got those kinds of guns. You may have it all up here, but if you don't have the tools, the hardware, what good are you? So you know what these guys actually decided to do? Is to artificially influence and manipulate the flow of history itself and move mankind forward. We can't talk about it a lot right now, but it's described in the DVDs and books about how they decide to move mankind forward artificially. So many people have asked, why is it that our technology and scientific ability, you see, is so far in advance of our emotional, psychological? Well, there's the reason. Because somebody's been pushing it that way. It's not natural. So the loss of their technological hardware was a major setback and predicament for the Atlantean serpents. They decided to manipulate the flow of history, the destiny of their Adamic progeny, pushing us ever forward to the point where the super technological hardware that was destroyed in the War of the Gods could be reproduced. Some instruments and weapons had survived, and these were sequestered in underground chambers in temple precincts referred to as the Holy of Holies. Not because they contained anything holy, but they just didn't want you going near it, because it was the remnants of their technology. Now, one thing I omitted to tell you earlier about the fact of the pursuit when the Nephilim first came to our planet is something else of extraordinary importance. When the pursuers of the Nephilim destroyed the planet Tiamat, they made haste to leave our solar system to avoid the cosmic upheavals created by their action. However, for some reason, they took extraordinary precautions to prevent their enemies, should they still be alive on our planet, from ever leaving. They erected a powerful etheric energy barrier around our entire planet. This enveloping shield still exists, and no one on Earth with the alien DNA can physically break through it or go beyond it. I refer to that in my book as the real Stargate. And all the ancient cultures talk about it, the all-encompassing shield. And they refer to it as the dragon. It's always shown as the dragon, surrounding something of great price. Even rings today, you'll buy jewelry with a dragon, encircling a pearl or a diamond or a gem. Where does that image come from? The Pista Sophia, a Gnostic book, says the outer darkness is a huge dragon whose tail is in its mouth. In Revelation 8 we read about it, the fifth angel. And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key to the bottomless pit, because the earth is now in quarantine. God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment. Now, about the time of the 15th century, as they were congratulating themselves on this progress of trying to build back, their technology, they were doing pretty good up until the 15th century. It's then that the alien bureaucracy discovered the presence of this Stargate. They had to face the fact that even if all their technological hardware was successfully reconstructed, they still couldn't vacate the planet Earth, which had been placed under quarantine. They're laboring away to move mankind forward for countless thousands of years, and then when they have enough flying saucers, as William Bramley proves, those saucers existed in the 15th century. They take them up there and they're bouncing back. They had a massive predicament, what to do. And many of the idioms that happen on this planet since the 15th century are explained by this. But undaunted by this discovery, the alien progeny decided to press ahead. They put their greatest intellectuals onto the problem to see if a solution could be found, believing that what technology could erect, technology could take down. The major dynasties of the planet underwrote occultists, scholars, scientists, and philosophers to work on the Stargate problem. Elaborate efforts were also made to cover up the existence of the real opus. The perfect covers came to be that of both science and occultism. And it was so effective that even today most students or practitioners of both science and magic are unaware of the practical importance of their work and to whom it is of benefit. Those of the inner sanctums also adopt clever cover acts and stories in order to be able to work undetected. Fronts are utilized by all major criminal syndicates, and it's no different with the children of the Nephilim, who have a great deal to hide from public view. And the top of the Nephilim bloodline during the 15th century was Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen. And she put her top mystics and scientists onto the job. The man on the left is John Dee, her own court astrologer, and he worked also with a clairvoyant from Ireland called Edward Kelly. And they were put onto the problem. Dee is an interesting character because he turns out to be the original 007. He used to sign his name 007. And he also is the creator of the British intelligence, secret intelligence, the first ever secret police of the world that's now MI5. And the symbol is very curious, isn't it? Because it looks remarkably similar, does it not, to the symbols we were looking at a little earlier. Now, John Dee was one of the most powerful black magicians in history. He decided that it would be better to contact pan-dimensional intelligences to solve their little problem of quarantine. Via his system of magic and divination, he succeeded in opening a portal to these fourth-dimensional entities, or oversouls. Dee became a living macroscope. This is not the first time in Earth history when such a forbidden rite was undertaken. Every time it occurs, it has the severest repercussions for history. Macroscope? That's right. If somebody had told us that under our level of sensual perception, there's a whole microbe world of microbes and little organisms and a whole eco-structure there, we'd have thought they were raving lunatics. We'd probably taken them down to the square and burned them as a witch. But then along comes the invention of the microscope, and suddenly we're convinced and, roll over and forget about it. Well, above the level of human perception are the macrobes, right? Oversouls. Not necessarily positive, but a whole other race of beings. This is what the philosophers are telling us. And John Dee decided that he has to contact those individuals to see if they have any answers to the problem. And they did. He became a living macroscope, literally opening himself up as a human portal to these entities. Now, in short, Dee was told that there were two cardinal premises which needed to be mastered before the Stargate could be opened. The first concerned creating matter from energy, but that would have to be revealed in two main stages. And the second key had to do with the properties of a certain element that we know as silicon. All right? Releasing energy from matter was what the first phase was. They said, you're too dumb to know how to, make matter from energy. We have to spend years showing you the opposite. How to release energy from matter. So in 1945, when the atom was split and the bomb was, detonated, that was the moment when phase one was completed. And they could then, from 1945 till now, move on to literally the nanotechnologies which are in vogue now of trying to make matter from energy. And the second phase involved silicon, which of course implies what? The computer. And the symbolism lets us know what's going on, if you know how to decode it. The half-open door always represents knowledge being revealed, secret knowledge being revealed. It's a Masonic symbol. And again, the purveyance of spiritual and mystical and magical symbolism, we'd wonder what is under the subtext there. Because we've got symbols that are telling us in the technological world what the real agenda is. We've got pyramids and earths. Again, we've got pyramids ascending up into the sky to break through into another world outside of the sky. We've got pyramids and striations, Masonic striations. We've got the American Business Award given right here in the Bay Area. But what does the award look like? A Masonic pyramid. There's the ideas to break out of here. The whole Atlantis shuttle bit is part of that. Because they don't like it here. They think this place is terrible, as the old Templar inscription at Rennes-le-Château says. This place is terrible. But they don't mean France and Rennes-le-Château. They mean the planet itself. Now, up until now, even with the vast majority of their sophisticated technical hardware again in their possession, the progeny of the Atlanteans are not able to break out of quarantine or out of their internment on the Earth, this silent planet. The commission to build a craft to go beyond the moon has been even privatized. Paul Allen announced his prototype craft on May 15th, the Mercuralia. The day that the world Illuminati meet, by the way, is May 15th. It's a very important day. It's the day the Matrix movie was also released. HARP waves, microwaves, are continually being beamed onto the ionosphere to superheat the sky to try and make a breakthrough passage. Go and ask Nick Bijak why HARP is millions of volts stronger than it was ever meant to be on paper. They have no answer for you. In fact, it's so much superheated the ozone layer, the ionosphere, that the ozone layer hole got created. Then they told you at CFCs and your McDonald's cartons. But the most important question is, why the big hurry? Why are they, moving technology forward in order to get out of this planet? This brings us up to the conclusion as to why they'd be moving so fast. There are many theories I want to share with you, but the first one involves a thing that is known colloquially as the photonic energy band, or the photon belt. That's meant to be coming about December 21st, 2012, as the Mayan calendar predicts. That at that time, our solar system and all of its planets move through a band of highly ionized, highly photonic energy, which has severe consequences for anyone who's toxic. Because light has certain spiritual principles, and photons are the highest form of light that we know physically. Mother Nature knows how to clean herself. There's a spin-dry cycle coming for the planet and the solar system. Get ready. The photon effect, Robert Stanley says that he reported on the discovery of the photon band by satellite in 1991. He says Barbara Han Clow actually talks about it in her Palladian agenda. She says that the excesses of photons are being emitted from the center of our galaxy. Our solar system enters the area of our galaxy every 11,000 years and then passes through for 2,000 years while completing its 26,000-year galactic orbit. We read that the photon effect is caused by the precession of our solar system and its accompanying planets around the central sun called Alcyone. This counterclockwise cyclic precession around Alcyone requires about 26,000 years to make one complete orbit. Our present-day sun, moon, and planets must twice pass through the photon belt during this time. That is, once to the north and once to the south. During this cycle, there are 2 periods of darkness and 2 periods of light. The periods of darkness, which constitute the vast majority of that rotation, consist of 2 periods of about 11,000 years. Following each period of 11,000 years or so of darkness, we then emerge into 2,000 years of total light, which actually constitutes the photon belt. So what they're saying is that the north and southern points of that great orbit are 2, you see, periods of 2,000 years where the whole of our solar system passes through that. It's what it is literally the roach cleaner on his way. Right? In a year, doesn't nature go through her spin-dry cycle? It's the same way up the fractal. It's the same way up the Fibonacci series. The photon belt was discovered in '61 by satellite-borne instruments. It comes around every 10,000 years or so. I mean, all these points can be debated, by the way. There's a lot of debate on this, but this is just the basics. Earth is thought to have entered the outer perimeter already. The sun's radiation, they say, will be, well, of course, it's the biggest light source of our solar system, so of course, photonic energy, definitely going to affect it. Electrons will be affected. Everything around you is made of them. And this will generate photonic radiation. If the sun enters the belt first, it will disappear and darkness will ensue. That's the famous 3 days of darkness. If the earth does, then the entire sky will appear to be on fire. All things will emit light and phosphorescence. Darkness will not exist. And some people are even speculating that it'll affect our DNA. Deepak Chopra says that photons come out of nowhere. They cannot be stored. They can barely be pinned down in time. And they have no home in space whatsoever. That is, light occupies no volume and has no mass. The similarity between a thought, and this is interesting, the similarity between a thought and a photon is very deep. Both are born in the region beyond space and time where nature controls all processes in that void which is full of creative intelligence. So it's connected. Light and thought are connected. Jeremy Narbury, talking about the biophotonic action, says, in the early 1980s, thanks to the development of a sophisticated measurement device, a team of scientists demonstrated that the cells of all living beings emit photons at a rate of up to approximately 100 units per second per square centimeter of surface area. They also showed that DNA, well, literally was the source of that photonic emission. So photon band equals changes in your DNA. Whatever the changes are, it doesn't concern me that much. But I just want to know there's a link. Well, hasn't the mythologies and the religions been telling us that anyway? That you are the temple of God, the sun of the universe is inside you, you're the intelligence? So we have the photon band concept, but there's something else that needs to be understood. Constellational alignments. In my DVD 2012, that's what this deals with. Because there's other things that you need to know about concerning this, because that might happen very soon, from 2007 onwards, in fact. And the most famous one of those, of course, is the Maya date of 2012 and the so-called Age of Revealing. You can't think about the 2012 date without thinking of what the Maya called their last 13-year countdown. Well, that last 13-year countdown obviously started in 1999. The exact midway point of that was November 8th, 2003. Well, we're already way past that. We're already past the halfway date of the last countdown of 13 years. That is why we're going to be seeing those changes very, very rapidly. And it also makes sense for all the saber rattling and the moral, political, economic climate that we're seeing right now. The Mayas called it the Age of Revealing. At sunrise on December 21st, 2012, for the first time in 26,000 years, the sun rises to conjunct the intersection of the Milky Way and the plane of the ecliptic. Okay, this is astrological jargon. If you're not familiar, just bear with us. This cosmic cross is considered to be an embodiment of the sacred tree, the tree of life, a tree remembered in all the world's spiritual traditions. Some observers say this alignment with the heart of the galaxy in 2012 will open a channel for cosmic energy to flow through the Earth, cleansing it and all that dwells upon it, raising it all to a higher level of vibration. In 2012, the plane of the solar system will line up exactly with the plane of our galaxy, the Milky Way. This cycle has taken 26,000 years to complete. The alignment was recorded by the Maya, whose calendar was said to arise from a phenomena referred to as the sacred tree. Is it any accident that the greatest humanitarians who have walked very close to humanity and who have loved us and tried to teach us this, all of this methodology and this message of psychic cleaning and the great Armageddon, that their movies should come back into vogue exactly after these periods, at the equinoxes and the solstices of the world? Is there any accident why those movies work on many levels? And how many secrets we're being told there about the great Armageddon and the fighting between the forces of light and darkness? One of the most other important events, which even precedes the 2012 date, is the coming of the planet Pluto across into the galactic center. Astrologically, Pluto, the planet of destruction, or if you prefer, deconstruction, and radical change, will be crossing galactic center and channeling that energy from the central sun. All planets are like little lenses, right? It's not so much that the planet generates energy itself, it channels energy from what is known as galactic center, where all the spiritual energy comes. And the planets that move in front of that locus focus cosmic energy in different ways, just like you put different filters in front of the lights. Mercury has just been crossing the meridian. When Pluto crosses the meridian, and Pluto is the channeler for the galactic center's energy, you're going to feel it. Right? You don't feel the sun so much, and you don't feel the Mercury and the smaller planets. You're going to feel this. It takes about 250 years for Pluto to complete one circuit of the zodiac, or 12 signs. Pluto is presently approximately about 24 degrees of Sagittarius. When it moves into Capricorn, the sign of order and government, it brings cataclysmic upheavals and exposure of all corruption in order to restore harmony and a higher way of being. The individual lives will be dramatically transformed. Pluto brings in deep cleansing cycle to the psyche of human beings. From Robert Hand, the great philosopher, the great astrologer, he says the nature of Pluto is similar to that of the Hindu god Shiva. Pluto usually begins by breaking down a structure, then creates a new one in its place. The entire cycle of death, destruction, and renovation is accompanied by tremendous powers, for Pluto is not a mild or even very subtle planetary influence. It brings decay at one level or another. It also rules the death and regeneration of the self, as old aspects of your life pass away. Pluto does not represent death in the literal sense. Instead, it refers to a metaphorical death, something that just ceases to be. Well, that entity, that compulsion within the psyche that the planets represent, is moving into prime position. Now, the dark side, or the perverse manifestation, because every symbol, every planetary influence you see has a positive and a negative side. Its perverse manifestation is in the unhealthy obsessions with death, perverse sex, and with breaking taboos, etc. The media is co-opting this and is already serving this aspect. Those forensic shows, right? Digging up corpses, CSI, looking beneath the surface, you see, wondering how things tick, infatuation with the body and its biology, and corpses and rotting stuff. Something wrong with it. It's part of a Plutonic archetype. Those reality shows and TV shows, they're co-opting it. They're ahead of us, you see. They know what's coming. And they're warming us up with the new mythography. But basically, Pluto draws attention to all the unhealthy aspects of life, psychologically and socially. It brings upheaval and drags down the masks and deposes false icons and gods. All that exposure that's happening with Michael Jackson and Martha Stewart and whatnot. Why do you think that's happening? Because the masks are coming down. Now it's going to shock both the antagonists and the protagonists. I assume you're protagonists. Well, I'm here to tell you that you better know what's going to be happening to those you have intimate connections with and intimate relationships and so on. This opening is greatly disturbing to the ego that will rather self-destruct than face its own shadows. Right? The ego is threatened by this. Pluto is the planetary ruler of what we call the underworld cycle. In the tarot, its card is number 13, death. And its action is catabolic. It breaks down. And the first thing that you're going to feel it breaking down is your relationships. That's where it hits the hardest. Pluto is connected to the alchemical wedding, what the alchemists call the chemical wedding. But what we don't read in all these flowery books about the chemical wedding is that one cannot achieve this elusive thing, the chemical wedding, without first experiencing a chemical divorce. One cannot attain the truth without first confronting and removing all that is false from the self. This action, ruled by Pluto, and in mythology we have Shiva, Durga, Kali, and Merlin, etc., representing that aspect, is deeply threatening to the ego of man, which wants to hold on to the status quo. Pluto, the dissolver, is closely associated with Uranus, the planet archetype of freedom, individuality, and rebellion. You know, the punk era and a lot of the countercultural bands and movements that have been happening since the 60s, that's ruled by Pluto and Uranus to expose corruption and show people how to be free and break the Saturnian patterns. Pluto and Uranus are already working to dissolve the common dependency-based relationships that men and women crave and which keep them estranged from selfhood and deep psychological maturation. Pluto is nature's hygienist, her psychic surgeon, which enters to rid us of all that is toxic, calcified, false, and unsustainable. It has to do this, because we've been taking for granted too many things. You know, when the safety net is removed from beneath your feet as you cross the tightrope, how reverently you now walk that tightrope that you took. Yeah. How reverently every step is taken. That's what's happening. The ladders are being pulled up on the middle class right now. Pluto in ancient world was actually Shiva. There's no difference. But what you haven't been told is that Shiva equals the Holy Spirit. My work goes into this. That they have their trinity of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, right? God, Son, Holy Spirit. Well, Shiva is the part that corresponds in the Hindu trinity to the Holy Spirit. So it's coming in, ladies and gentlemen. It's not Pluto, some archetype, some planet you needn't worry about. There is a connection here to something incredibly important. Now, man's psyche is unclean. Everything is cleaned, but not the human psyche. Man's relationships of the old Piscean, Saturnian type are chronically dependency-based. We are emotional and psychological prostitutes. Totally living on the surface of ourselves, projecting our own dark content externally onto others, and enslaving others to our needs and desires. And then we call this love. But it is the dark, secret love of the poets, and has nothing to do with freedom and advancement. The physical kind of prostitution, that's small potatoes. We are inherently dependent on others. I need you, you need me. We call that relationship today. We're living on the surface of ourselves, in the persona world, in the ego world. And all the dislikes that we have about ourselves and other people, we repress, as the psychologists have warned us. And it becomes the shadow. Well, Pluto is connected to the shadow. We don't need psychologists to tell us, though, that we have a Jekyll and a Hyde, and we have this personal shadow that we often project onto other people. The dark aspects of the personal psyche, which threaten the ego's autonomy, are repressed. They are also subconsciously projected onto others who become external representatives of our shadow self. This projection occurs as a compensation for the inner psychic tension we feel as a result of that repression. In severe cases, we also process this content through the field of others. And then there's also the collective psyche and its dark content, which is likewise projected. Right? You have your individual shadow. The world has its shadow that sometimes through history gets projected on others. What do we get when we don't cleanse the inner being then? Given that we do not do this shadow work, what is it that we get when we do not do it? Well, the masses of men and women in the Western world compulsively avoid true, authentic psychoanalytical investigation of their natures, particularly in regards to so-called darker aspects of the personality. However, not dealing with the psyche at all proves systemically hazardous. Right? A compromise is required. Hence the proliferation of the New Age philosophy and movement together with its many permutations. Riddled with ego-customized shams and gimmicks, the application of its methods serve for the most part to merely bolster the failing ego and its drives. Being that dark and toxic within, we gave rise to the sadism of our world, and the masochism and the ecocide that it comes about in our world as the manifestation of rape and murder and cruelty towards others. But I am interested in cruelty towards others, yes. But I'm more interested in how we are cruel to ourselves. I'm not smart enough. We're not attractive enough. We're not tall enough. We're not thin enough. We're not rich enough. We're not social or active enough. We're not witty enough. I'm not still enough. I can't control my mind. I'm not in control enough. I'm not caring and I'm not giving enough. I'm not holy enough. I'm not perfect enough. We observe in this world, granted, we've got pretty good, at knowing and defining the cruelty to others. Thank God. We are extremely backward in noticing how we're just cruel to ourselves. Let's start observing that. Because if you're sadistic towards the self, which they call masochism, but it's really sadism to the self, you're inherently going to be sadistic to others. And we have this illusion of normalcy. When we say we desire to live in a peaceful, harmonious world and see beauty all around us, what we often really mean is that we wish we could edit out from our view that ugliness we don't want to see, and which disturbs our ego's image of perfection. We do anything to anesthetize ourselves from the pain of the real. So living in harmony doesn't mean not looking at the dirt. We all want to live forever, but no one wants to age. We want to know everything, but we don't want to open our minds. We want to avoid pain, but never find out why pain arises in our life. We all want freedom, but don't know what to do with it when we get it. Or we abuse it when we have it. We all want the light, but we're afraid of facing the dirt that the light might reveal. There's a couple of different actions that light has, don't forget. We want others to fill us, but we can't fill ourselves or another. We want to see reality as it really is, but don't want to see ourselves as we really are. As Vernon Howard, the great American philosopher, said, human sickness is so severe that few can bear to look at it, but those who do will become well. That requires a certain kind of courage, the courage you're all going to need in the next lot of years. Not to look out and worry about tyrants on Capitol Hill, but the tyrant within, the syzygy, the schizoid nature of your inner republic. Or all the knights sitting at your round table within? If they're not, then don't tell me about politics, and don't try to fix the outer ambiance. The magical tradition, which is another bequeathment of our ancient forefathers. Because that's actually my main work. Those who've been part of my online mystery school or taken my classes know that my work is mainly with the divination arts, tarot, astrology, Kabbalah, numerology. Why? Well, it's just like I talked about yoga a few minutes ago. These are the ways that our forefathers already created for us. We don't need to create anything new. They already did it. They created us the tools, the plutonic tools for helping to clean our psyche. I've just created another website. I'm so concerned, you see. I am very concerned about what's going to be happening in the next 7 years. There's movements and actions happening which is removing our power more and more every day. So we need to defend ourselves by bolstering our own defenses and empowering ourselves. The way to do that is through the magical arts. Now, if we do not autonomously clean our psyches and strive to live morally, and if we continue to violate the natural order because of our inner emotional state, we will allow the ego to manifest surrogate channels to exercise its repressions and other negative debris. In short, if we give up the right rulership of the self, we inevitably breed Orwellian political and religious tyrants to take over the job and turn us into what George Simmel called the smiling depressives, or worse. All right? Or Carl Jung said it much more simply. When an inner situation is not made conscious, it appears outside of you as fate. When you are that toxic inside and you're not knowing how to deal with it, I mean, you clean everything, don't you? But if you don't clean our psyche, then we give rise to the worst kind of people, the worst kind of monstrosities that exist. In TV land, we marvel and even love these penitentiary psychodramas in which some quiescent belle, falls in love with some incarcerated sex fiend. However, the main tragedy of womankind, of which this is but a paltry sideshow, goes unnoticed. As I say in my book, the women who once ruled the world are now content to serve its destroyers. What has happened? As Voltaire said, the ancient Romans built their greatest masterpieces of architecture, for wild beasts to fight in. Now, having projected his anger onto the world, says the Course in Miracles, man sees vengeance about to strike at him, his own attacks thus perceived as self-defense. Get it? When fear unites with knowledge, says the ancient Maya books, terrible things are done. Well, Vico knew about it, Plato knew about it, that what happens in the psyche is, the cycles of the psyche manifest as the cycles of history. First you have chaos, then theocracy, then aristocracy, democracy, and then as the republics become imperial or tyrannous, they collapse and we're back to chaos again. But it's not historical cycles, it's articulated to our inner cycles. Now there's a time in which the simple shadow work, given that you're doing it, by the way, but there's even a time that even if you are doing the simple shadow work, that can sometimes prove not enough to help clean the psyche. When we are not integrated internally, and when our own masculine and feminine aspects are imbalanced, we invariably turn to external representatives to restore a semblance of stability. We turn to parents, heroes, politicians, evangelists, authority figures, whoever. We even turn to ideals and causes for that structure. And all manner of horrors have arisen as a result of that. Now the approach of Pluto arouses fear, paranoia, and the whole cocktail of the darker toxic emotions. Subsequently, the individuals feel deeply insecure and as a result tend to cleave even more to these familiar Saturnian archetypes. The one that I'm mostly thinking of is Big Daddy, the male archetype. This preposterous archetype that habitually down through the centuries we have to deal with. And that's where the cult of the politician is so important. We have one right now. Let's note, ladies and gentlemen, the language. We're told there's a war on terror. Well, maybe it's the English in me, but the word terrorist and the word terrorism are very different than the word terror. There is a war on terror, all right, but it's of a psychological nature rather than a political one. So when you find yourself in a climate of atrocity and terror, find out what's happening inside your own self that's causing that into existence. And we know, as we've been looking at it, that this archetype of the father figure is nothing more than a rescripting of the old God lie from Jehovah. The concept is that you do not find vultures and carrion crows sitting in a Japanese tea garden. Right? Well, that's what these creatures are. So therefore, don't you see what they're doing? How wonderful to create an ambiance in the world full of mayhem, toxicity, cruelty, injustice. Because that's what they are inside. And you like your outward, you feel comfortable, don't you? In the ambiance that suits you. So a world of foment and all of us strangling and murdering each other. That's the world that they want to create for themselves. And America is very good at it. The normal round of warfare after World War II is a startling catalogue of atrocity. And archaeology supports the view that warfare is a development of only the past 10,000 years. The combined military expenditures of all the world's governments in 1987 were so large that all of the social programs of the United Nations could be financed for 300 years. And you're wondering why people are starving and we can't fix poverty. The ambiance must be full of paranoia and fear. That helps. So, as Edward Griffin, one of the great American scholars into this subject, says, you deliberately create the problems and then offer only those solutions which result in the expansion of government. You create conditions so frightful at home and abroad that the abandonment of personal liberties and national sovereignty will appear as a reasonable price to pay in return for domestic tranquility and world peace. So, we don't have the order within, and we are looking to Big Daddy to bring it in. But Big Daddy's only too happy to do it, to create false nemesis and false heroes and create a whole culture of fear and paranoia, this way to the paranoid society. Because they will bring you, as the imagery shows you, they will bring you an order. They will bring you the New World Order. But it will be a certain kind of order. It will be the draconian or Orwellian order. As Orwell describes it, it's the boot stamping in the face of humanity forever. That'll be your order. The order of stand where you want, where you're told. Vaccinations, injections, and mind control? Is that the kind of order we want because we're not psychically in tune inside? That we're hypnotized by these individuals who use these talismanic words and terms? Security, strength, a stronger America? Enemies, safety? It's like some crazy movie where they're promising us safety and then saying, yeah, we'll give you safety, we'll give you security, but we'll do it through war. We have to have a war. The war is the expatiation, the processing of all that toxicity, and we feel good about it. Bush's rating soared after the war was, initiated. Even though people said many hundreds of thousands of people might have to die. They said that's all right. His rating soared. We have more to share with you, ladies and gentlemen, but we have to pause now. So in doing that, let me just thank you again for being here, for lending your time and your energy to our cause. Thank you very much.